It is Thursday, November 8th, 2018, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas from SiriusXM, as well as MMAFighting.com. We are live here in our New York City studios, back with this arrangement needs a name. We don't have a name for it. I'm going to call it Team Achievement for now. But you guys...
For short, that's A-team, right?
The A... Well, we had the A-team, jerk face. All right. You know who this is. To my left is Danny Segura from MMAFighting.com. That is Brian Campbell from CBS Sports. And at the end, it is Iceman Mindenhall, Chuck himself, the man in the hat.
Yep.
How you doing, fellas? Good?
All right.
Caffeinated and fired up.
You are way more caffeinated than is medically advisable.
Yes.
Also, y'all are talking with 5 seconds left to go. It's like herding cats over here with you three.
He does this.
All right, let's get to it. You know what's interesting, boys? A lot to get to in terms of the MMA topics, but there's one that's been almost not discussed at all. Were it not for the step and repeat at yesterday's open workouts, you might have even forgotten about it. The step and repeat is the series of logos they put behind someone for scrum interviews or when someone walks the red carpet. It's got all the logos of the various people involved. And I bring that up because the UFC's in Denver this week. And in Denver, the step and repeat had the original UFC logo because on the 12th, although the fight will be on the 10th, it's the 25th anniversary show of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. 450 plus shows. I think 455 or so is what it's going to bring us to. Danny, I'll start with you. Not a lot of folks talking about. What's interesting is they started with the pay-per-view. They're having their 25th anniversary show. They are back in the city where it all started. So there's an overture of ceremony there. It's a fight night show. Not even all that. I mean, it's not a bad one, but it's not that great of a one. What do you make of this sort of downplayed quarter-century event?
It's a big achievement, considering where the sport was just 25 years ago and, where the company was just 25 years ago. And so, I expected them to, have sort of a bigger event, but in some sort of ways, if you're a hardcore and you've been around long enough, man, this is a really nice card. This is a nice treat. If you go down, there's some really good fights on there. And, I really like the way they packaged everything and went retro, and the way everything has evolved has been ridiculous. I mean, I'm 26 years old. I've basically,
Wow.
I don't know. Can you believe it? Like,
I've been around just as long as this company's been around. And, I've been tuning into the UFC since I was in middle school. So as I've grown up, I've been, able to watch the progress of the company.
Let me tell you about a guy named Joe San, then.
Sure, go for it.
Good kid.
So they are downplaying it, which is a little bit strange considering that, it's such an important milestone. But, here we are.
I mean, it's a good fight night card, but this is your 25th anniversary. I expect more. I want more. They could surprise me on Saturday in how they celebrate this in Denver. Maybe we'll see the G-Man, Rich Goins, back on the mic. Maybe that dude who burped to open the broadcast of UFC 1 will be back if he's still alive. But my point is, overall...
And by the way, they are at the Pepsi Center, not the First Bank Arena, so it's a much larger arena.
Nichols Arena,
I'd like to see a parade of everybody who's still alive from UFC 1 getting announced and getting a moment. And I'd also wished we meaning UFC, maybe made this feel more important. Yeah. And I feel like when it comes to history, the Dana White and Zuffa era likes to act like the UFC started in 2002 or 1. And maybe some of the heroes that, to me, having watched since UFC 2, the Randy Coutures, the Hoist Gracies, don't get the love because of some of their business relationships and decisions with MMA where
they're
Dana
mostly
White
at
has...
Bellator now.
Right, and Dana White has sort of recycled the narrative that the real legends of UFC are Matt Hughes and Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin and BJ Penn, and that's fine. And I know the winner, it's just like in the WWE Network, the winner in the end gets to rewrite history and tell it. Yes, there's that UFC 25 documentary series. They bury it on Fight Pass. It's really damn good. But I don't feel like there's an embrace of the SEG era, which was a Wild West, ridiculous, corny, amazing era that I'd like to see them put a little bit more forward and say, this is where we came from, guys. This is where we are now.
I mean, the 25th year anniversary came at a time where they're just scrambling to put pay-per-views together to, put cards together at last minute. So it's hard to celebrate something when you got, slots to fill and other bigger things to worry about just to, have the business continuing.
I don't remember which event was placed around the 20th anniversary. I just remember that there were a lot of bells and whistles for that. If you remember, there was a whole series where they had a lot of talking heads from the media who basically contributed to this 20 years, celebrating 20 years. They had the logo all over 20
They didn't ask your boy. They never asked me.
But
John Jones said he couldn't do it.
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see if they do roll out some of those names. I guess I'm kind of waiting to see. You would think that they would want to celebrate that history regardless. But we all know that it is the fight game. It's not the same thing as a sports franchise that gets over a guy. Who's the New York Knick who they kicked out of the building? Oakley. somebody like that. You know what I mean?
Exactly,
There's
yeah.
very few situations where there's bad blood between a team and a player like that in those types of sports. But you catch that obviously in the fight game, and it just goes back and forth like this. But I am really anxious to see what they roll out at the night of the event, if they're going to do anything. My biggest regret is I lived in Denver in 1993.
You're a Denver guy.
I'm from Denver, and I remember seeing, hearing on the radio and seeing little things that it was happening and being intrigued, but not going. My biggest regret is not going to that. And what I remember about it is that there was like I was going to a Denver Broncos game. It was like Halloween, and they announced that River Phoenix died right when they were talking about this.
Wow.
So it's like there's this correlation between those two things that are always very strange. Like he died on Halloween, I think it was at the Viper Room, and that event happened like November, whatever it was, right after that. November 12th, was it? So those two things are
November
always
12th,
like
that's right.
correlated, and it's kind of amazing actually to sit back and think about how many iterations this sport has gone through. So looking at it like that, I feel like just for its accomplishment of being where it is, ESPN, everything that it's accomplished, and going on to ESPN and everything else, there should be more bells and whistles.
Yeah, am
to
I
it.
overthinking the idea that the main event isn't big enough for the idea that this is our 25th anniversary?
Well, they had kept on Frankie Edgar and Korean Zombie. Maybe that could have been. It's not their fault. Frankie got injured, so they're doing this with Yair Rodriguez, which we'll talk about in just a second. So is your argument that the original booking could have been bigger? Yeah?
Pretty much. I mean, I'm saying maybe put a title fight on there, maybe make it a pay-per-view, maybe just be a little
Maybe
bit
bring
more.
back Hoist Gracie.
My hunch is...
Shamrock Part 4, come on.
What's interesting to me is I'm totally speculating here, but I think they were like, okay, what's on the to-do list in November, 25th anniversary show, and we have to go to MSG. I'm betting that they found an open MSG night and then built everything around that, which kind of blew up in their face a little bit because of everything happened with UFC 230. It's just, again, speculation. I don't know. I don't know how much purpose there is to reflect on like how far the UFC's come, because we do it every 5 years. But it is kind of interesting. The first show, you got
It's always evolving as well. They're always doing more things. So it's like
the first show, you guys getting his teeth kicked out, who's a sumo wrestler, and now they're open workouts with Mike Perry freestyling. Maybe they haven't come that far, actually. Maybe it's actually about the same. In any event, the card itself is worth talking about. Brian, I'll start with you on this one. The main event, you didn't like it too much with, I guess, not as a
it's a
fine fight, but not as a main event given the conditions. Okay, but that one's gone now. It's Korean Zombie and Yair Rodriguez. Let's start with Korean Zombie. 4 years gone from his career due to military service and injuries. Comes back, has an amazing win against Dennis Bermudez in 2017. Then has to get out again because of injuries. This guy has lost so much time. I feel like he's lost a ton of momentum, to the point that the Korean Zombie, when he came back the first time in 2017, there was buzz everywhere. Zippy on this one.
He's been gone so long, he almost feels like he represents a different era in UFC history.
I think he does.
At UFC 225. It's very interesting. And in an odd way, Frankie Edgar going off the fight loses some star power to this. I almost like this matchup more with Yair Rodriguez to just add the little bit more potential for wild violence. Where Frankie's a little bit more of a standard workman-like economical guy who can take the fight to the ground and win in more traditional ways. I think this could be a really fun fight. But to touch on your point, that Korean Zombie, man, welcome back. We need it. He bangs.
Yeah.
Bro, he bangs.
he bangs.
Sometimes you
Like
just gotta
William
bang.
Hahn.
It's crazy that you mentioned putting these things into context. Korean Zombie has fought twice in the Fox era. Like, that's kind of crazy. When you
Jesus
think about that,
Christ.
isn't that nuts, man? I mean, like, he has fought that. So you really, when you say that he belongs to another era, that's legit. I believe that you're talking about a whole different set of fans. A lot of those fans aren't even paying attention. There's a whole new crop of fans. Of course, there are some turnover.
And he hadn't hit puberty yet.
There is some turnover there. But I like the fight, too, ultimately, because Rodriguez was going to be coming back. Who was he supposed to be facing? It was
the beat
right. And I did not like that because it was like you're bringing a guy back who's coming off a really terrible loss and putting him in there against a guy who looks like he's going to skyrocket and inevitably be a champion someday. I didn't really like those two ships crossing in the night at that juncture, but I do like this one, only in the sense like, you got Rodriguez who's now been out for a pretty long time against a guy who's been literally inactive for the last bunch of years. So to me, and they both bring it. They're both very freelance style guys. They're both opportunists. I think when they smell blood in the water, it's like they pounce. I dig that sort of that matchup as well. And it did occur to me the exact same thing you said, whereas Edgar, brings a game plan and he'll execute it, even though he gets wild in the exchanges and stuff. But I think he wants to execute a game plan. These guys, I feel like they'll accommodate each other in a brawl. And
I actually think Brian makes sense here.
Wow.
His take on, I think this is a better matchup than the Frankie Edgar one, just given the fact that how Korean Zombie is. He brings it. He can take the fight to the ground, but he's very comfortable with slugging it out.
Sure.
And we know what Yair brings as well. So from an action standpoint, I think it's a better fight. And actually, from a divisional standpoint, I think it makes more sense. I think Frankie Edgar should maybe be fighting others than the Korean Zombie. Korean Zombie has been out for a while, about the same as Yair. I think they're only like a couple months apart from their layoff. And Korean Zombie, I mean, this is the guy that was fighting Mark Hominick. This is the guy that's from the crop of the WEC days, which those guys have been slowly fading out. So this is an old school guy. And Yair represents sort of the new school, you know? He's a
What's
young
interesting,
guy.
though, is like, remember, Korean Zombie was at a point where even Dana White was walking around wearing his T-shirt.
Yeah.
That feels like
By the way,
85 years ago.
that was the most badass fighter T-shirt I've ever seen.
So my question is to the panel here very quickly, is that even attainable at this point for the Korean Zombie? Getting back to that seems like his peak, if you ask me, at least in terms of popularity, if not so much as fighting.
He did have a real cult vibe back then. I mean, it was like, he was like one of those, I don't even know, man. Like he had that kind of cult vibe to him that basically you could wear. I remember everybody was talking about the Korean Zombie back then. I'm not sure you can recapture that. It kind of depends. If he goes out there and just blows right through Rodriguez, and because he had that twister. Remember, there was a lot of different reasons that went into it. You got to remind the people or show up afresh and kind of do that stuff again to get there. I still think he has probably one of the better nicknames in the game. So like, we'll see how it translates.
He had a window where he was MMA's Arturo Gatti, where Dana White, old school boxing fan, was embracing him, lifting him up, to your point. So, yeah, probably not going to get back there, but can he be a fun TV fighter for another 4 or 5 years? Let's do it.
Yeah.
I think it's possible. He has a win over Dustin Poirier. I mean, Dustin Poirier is killing it right now, and he's knocking on the title. You know, he's right there.
Who did you fight last? Bermudez, and it was
Bermudez,
a KO?
yeah, he got a KO.
Okay.
I think if he gets a very exciting win and he's able to have a quick turnaround and not sort of let fans forget about his win over Yair, if he does get past them, I think he could be right in the mix.
The one thing that he always did was, if you look at the bonuses as a measure of what this guy brings, I mean, he's almost always in the category of the performance of the night, the fight of the night, the KO of the night, the submission of the night. He's almost always in that category.
What about Yair Rodriguez, pardon me, Danny? What do you make of his opportunity here? He was kicked out of the UFC, then brought back, was supposed to fight Zabit, and now gets this guy. To Brian's point, maybe it's more risk, but maybe more accommodating of the kind of fighting that Yair likes. What is possible for him at this point? Because I feel like he hasn't, I'm told he doesn't like to do a lot of media, and he hasn't done a ton of media. I think he did the scrums, and he's friendly, don't get me wrong, but like, he just likes to focus.
Right.
Feels like, I won't say he fell off because that's not true, but it does feel like, which way is he going to go with this one?
I think this is a very, defining career fight for him. He's still young. He can turn things around if he does suffer a loss, but it is very important because for a while he was the next big thing, at least in Latin America. We know the UFC, with going earlier this year to Chile, now in November, in 2 weeks to Argentina, they've been focusing a lot on the Latin American market. And just like Santiago Poncinillo, this is a guy that you can throw in any of the Latin American cards and he can headline any fight night. So he's still a very important figure. He's just been, at odds with the promotion and Dana White. I think if he puts on an exciting performance, he does get a win. He can sort of put that, behind him and move forward with his career. But this is a very important one because I think he got a lot of hate with the fans because a lot of people thought he was ducking Zabit. And then, the fight finally gets booked and then he gets injured. I can only believe him, right? So I believe he really did get injured. But you know how fans are. They don't really agree with his his condition.
He's almost got more to prove from the standpoint of he was like the flashy new toy, the guy with the fun, crazy style, and then Edgar really humbled him. So it is kind of the perfect opponent for him to kind of come back, get into a firefight, remind us of what he does well.
Not to mention, poetically, I guess, to an extent, he's replacing the guy who did it to him, which is an odd thing to take, to then kind of take a spot from Frankie Edgar. It's just kind of an interesting dynamic that they got going on that. But I do think you're right. I think he had a buzz to his name because we were all hyping him up. I know I was talking about him like, watch out for this guy. He was one of those top 5 type guys that you're like, he could be in a year from that time, could be a champion type thing. And here we are all this time later, and he's just trying to find his identity again in a fight. So I agree with you. I think this is a really big fight. He's going to have a nice showing, but he also has to show his prowess again because I think that people kind of forget how good his kicks and everything were before that Edgar fight.
I'm curious to see where his mind is at because if you look at the build up to the Edgar fight, with the English outlets, he was one way. With the Hispanic outlets, he was different. He was saying, I'm beating Edgar, I'm getting a title shot. Like in his mind, he was already going to fight in 2017 for the title. He was going to become champion. I mean, he had it all figured out. Yeah. And then once he got fought Edgar, that sort of derailed everything, and things went kind of south for him. Yeah. And I'm curious to see how he comes back for that, because he was a victim of poor matchmaking. That's what it was. He went from fighting BJ Penn in 2017 to fighting Frankie Edgar, who's been a title contender all the time. And now he's getting a matchup that, although Korean Zombie is very good, it's very accommodating, as you said, to his style. So I'm really curious to see how he bounces back.
That way we continued on this thread of bad matchmaking.
Hopefully he can give BJ his soul back before 232.
Chuck, let's go back to you on this one for the now co-main event. Mike Perry taking on Donald Cerrone. Let's start with Cerrone here on this one. We're talking about Chris Weidman after his loss to Jacare. It's like 4 of his last 5, man. That's a bad place to be. That's the exact same place that Donald Cerrone's in. He has lost 4 of his last 5. Now, he's saying, I think this week, that he has intentions of going back to lightweight and potentially pursuing opportunities there. I'm not sure that's the worst idea in the world. Where is he in his career?
It's tough, man. It's really, because these guys this is his 29th fight in the UFC.
Which is just insane.
He's fought, look at who he's fought. I mean, he stood in there with some of the best guys in the game through his whole career, and some of them on weird notice and just helping the company out and stuff. He has had a career like no other. And so you always look at a guy like that and you're like, man, he is cumulatively, this guy's taken a lot of damage over this time. How much does he have left? How much hunger does he have left to do this? But whatever reason, he always seems to dig it out of himself to get a good performance when his back's against the wall. He's never had his back against the wall quite like this, though. I feel like if he loses a 5th out of 6, and even going back down, he'll remain with the company. They love him, but he'll go back down to lightweight. And at that point, though, I think you're putting like a little bit of something's come off his name. I don't think you're going to be looking at the same Cowboy. So I think
Brian, real quick, if I may, let me interject here. It's not merely that he's lost the 4 of the 5. It's also that they fed him to Leon Roberts, young up-and-comer.
Right.
Mike Perry, guy in his 20s, up-and-coming. It's like they're putting all the young guys against him at this point.
Yeah, I would say the luster's already off, the whole idea that he's a legitimate title contender. But I think there's sneaky motivation not to count him out in this one, not just the whole camp issue with Mike Perry and Jackson Wink, but he's tied with Michael Bisping for, I believe, most victories in UFC history. And this is a opportunity in Colorado, a place he loves, to kind of get a historic win. And I'm not saying walk away for good, but I think there's a good platform. There's some motivation in there to go in there and be a taste of the Cowboy of old. A little diet, cheap, generic soda, cola taste, Stop and Shop taste of that version of old.
Here we go. The gas station reference only took you 17 minutes.
Sorry, there's caffeine.
You utter degenerate. What about Mike Perry in this one? Because we got a lot to get to. I want to move along. What about Mike Perry here, Danny? He seems fired up, accusing his teammate Ray Borg of malingering. Essentially. Oh, no, not malingering to avoid confrontation with a guy that works in the gym. He's apparently avoiding. I don't get that one, but okay. And then doing the freestyle stuff yesterday. I saw Mike at UFC 229. He's so utterly personable in person, but he's a different one, man. He's a feral animal. And I say that kind of in a complimentary way. What do you make of him heading into this? I think he realizes, dude, if I beat Cerrone, I'm the man at that gym and I can zoom up these rankings and popularity.
This is a huge opportunity because he's failed. He's come up short against a few guys, and Cerrone is a big name. And Cerrone, is a bit on a downfall right now. So if he can catch him, it's still a very important name to add to his record. And, it'll put him in a good spot. And also, he's sort of, in a way, he's sort of kind of become the Donald Cerrone of the welterweight division in a way that he'll fight anybody at any time. So this just speaks to, to that. And he's just a fighter's fighter. He's in there to brawl. So it is a very important fight for him. And man, if he gets a victory over him, especially all the things that he's talked about in the build-up, it's going to be a big one for him.
He's such a polarizing guy. Yeah. I just feel like if he gets on any kind of win streak, we'd find out just how big of a star he is, because he certainly has charisma, like you were mentioning. He has charisma in ways that are very hard to identify, because
he's a straight gangster, that's why.
It's true, but I mean, he's wearing headdress and stuff. He's pissing people off at the same time as he's endearing fans. So it's one of those type of situations. It's combustible enough where you're like, if he puts a win streak together, especially in nice profile fights, I feel like he could be a really strange big star in the sport.
He could be a sneaky. I was going to say he can have a window to be a sneaky star because the personality seems real in the same way that Derek Lewis just sort of blew up out of nowhere.
It's also full of fire. I mean, whether you like it or you hate it, I didn't understand the headdress thing. Okay, but he did it. The
Cowboys and Indians, come on.
I know, I get that part, but like the 23andMe, it's like you're 2% black. It's like, that means you're not black. That's what that means. But okay, he takes license with it, but on the other side, you talk to him in person, and I'm telling you, it's not like what you think it is. It's totally different. But he's so full of life.
Yes, he is.
He's got that young man's, just to your point, caffeinated energy.
He's not mailing in his interviews.
No,
If
nothing.
he's talking to you, he is giving you 100% who he is, which I can appreciate. The few times I've talked to him, a couple of times, it's always, you always get off the phone thinking, man, that guy, he's got it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, again, I think it's a nice platform for him, and he knows how to work a mic. And you know, if he wins, it's been interesting to see kind of what he says. You pay attention to him on all those levels, and it's hard for a lot of fighters for people to want to pay attention to them on those levels.
It seems like he's feeling that this is his chance, though. He's taking his nutrition as serious as ever.
He moved
with
out of
George
Florida.
Lockhart. Yeah, he's like not even putting cream in his coffee. He's going all in on the idea.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens if I give my very best. That's a dangerous guy to be.
Right, certainly is. And already was pretty formidable. Now he's ironing out some of those things he just took for granted before. To the table. Any other fight on this card got your attention for any reason?
I'll throw out there Raquel Pennington versus Jermaine Durandamy. I think
Sneaky good fight.
super good because both of them have very interesting stories. I feel like they don't have a whole lot to gain from a win, but they have a whole lot to lose. If they happen to lose. You know, Raquel Pennington's coming off a title fight, and you know, one that was very controversial where she wanted to quit and her coach basically just threw her back in there. And you know, now she's getting a chance to hopefully, you know, get back in the mix. And Jermaine Durandamy, I'm really curious to see how
She's also coming off a controversial title fight.
Very controversial. She was just the last, you know, featherweight champion.
Like she's been gone.
She's been gone for a while, and I feel like kind of like Saraja Eubanks, kind of gives me the feel that she's kind of become a villain, and I'm curious to see how fans embrace her when she comes out because she's been out for a while.
Can you embrace someone with middle fingers?
Well, the problem is she's not a fun villain. That's the problem. Saraja Eubanks is a fun villain. I want to, you know, get on board with that, either loving or hating her. But Durandamy's a boring villain. I think she deserves this chance.
But on the case, she's fantastic. She's a badass striker. So, you know, if she gets a few wins, I'm sure a lot of people will be rooting against her. But still, you know, I'm sure there's still a lot of eyes on her just because the stage that she was in before.
I like, I mean, Luis Peña's coming back, the Violent Bob Ross, and he's another one of those guys who has been, he kind of has that weird it factor, almost like Israel Adesanya, but on a way lower level at this point. But he certainly has something to him that, so far, his in-cage prowess meets his personality. So I feel like that should be interesting as well.
All right, so yesterday, well, actually, there are 2 flyweight fights on this card, and there's only, 3 left on the year.
Would have liked to have seen that one.
Yeah. So in any event, flyweight is basically done for. Flow Combat yesterday reporting that the division's basically done at this point. I mean, they'll carry out the contracts that they have, but the kicker was not everyone who's a flyweight is going to be allowed to bump to bantamweight. They're just cutting certain ones, including Jose Shorty Torres. He goes out there and he says, hey, I won one, I lost one. Matchmakers tell me you were lucky to get the win. You got KO'd in your last one, and I had him on my show and we talked about it. So, okay, it's done for. Boys, the division, let's just call it what it is. It's basically been one of those animals that's been shot and has now run, and you get the hounds out to go follow the blood trail, which is just a gruesome thing to witness, which I've done. All right, so, Brian, I go to you.
Wow, yeah.
What is the flyweight division's legacy inside the UFC? Because remember, it's going to continue in other places, but inside that span that it lived in, what is its legacy?
It was a fun in a pocket rocket way for a hot minute, and then it simply became a platform for Demetrius Johnson to create a legacy and become an all-time great fighter. It was always derided and hated by Dana White, and man, this is a quick and not subtle, brutal exit of the division, and not to come out all Luke Thomas on you and say, just legalize PEDs, just kill people, whatever these others, just do that thing.
These are neither of my positions.
I got to come out and say, you were right on saying this, business-wise, this feels like the right move. And they shouldn't stop here. Hey, women's featherweights. Sorry, we're done with you too. Maybe trade Cyborg to Bellator. Let's just cut the fat.
Let me stick with you for just a second, if I may, boys. The reason why I want to go with you is there's an argument that gets floated around that it's like, well, in boxing, you've got guys who are deeply popular in the 120 pound weight classes and 130 pound weight classes. Obviously, bantamweight is pretty popular for the UFC, but if you can get them that popular in the 120s, why can't you do it in MMA? What do you make of that argument?
Yeah, I think that's a fine argument.
Well, then why are they getting rid of flyweight then?
Oh, I thought you were saying the argument was if you can get them popular at flyweight, move them back up to bantam.
No. The argument is if they can be popular at this size in boxing, why can't they be popular at that size in MMA?
I mean, look, ultimately it's not fair, but this is a business decision.
Okay, I'm asking you, why are 120
so
pound?
fired up.
No. Listen to the question. Why are 120 pound plus boxers popular, and why are 120 pound plus MMA fighters not? That's the key question.
I mean, it's a little bit different. Boxing has 17 weight classes, 126 featherweight. There's still like 5 or 6 weight classes below it. I just think that the hardcore heart of UFC fans, well, no, maybe not the hardcore. The hardcores are going to appreciate great fighting. You know, the casual heart, blood and guts violence, just never really can't really hear Jimmy. Can't really understand exactly what they're seeing on there, despite the quick speed and the artistry that they're showing. I just don't think it translates on that level.
Yeah, psychologically, we've thought about this a lot. You're like, do the smaller guys translate for an audience that wants to think, like, that guy could kick anybody's ass? That's always the thing, right? I think when people first watch the smaller guys, especially at the 125-pound division, there's always this, you know, even though it's completely false, we know that Demetrius would beat anybody up within that we know, but it's like, I think there's people who are like casual who would look at it and be like, dude, come on, who is this guy could kick his ass? I do think that kind of thing plays a role into it. I also think it's just weird though too, because when the division started in 2012, when they went out to Australia for that little mini 4-man tournament to kick it off, it almost had the flavor of a like some kind of like a record store vibe, like something culty and cool. Like there was something like the hipsters knew about it. The hipsters, Jordan Breen could tell you about like Urusha Tani. He could tell you about these guys at the Tachi Palace. He could tell you about Ian McCall. He was doing pieces, and then you're like, this is cool. We get to finally see these dudes in the UFC. And Demetrius Johnson going on. It's created for Joseph Benavidez really because he was beating everybody not named Dominic Cruz. He was going down. It was almost like Dominic Cruz personally built this division by knocking off too many guys who couldn't get back to him. So they're like, well, let's make another division and start it from there. But it started in this area of cool that never could stay there. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like it was a little bit darlinged at the time. Like, people were wanting to see it. They were wanting to embrace it. But as it kind of played out, and especially once Demetrius established his run, it's almost like it lost enthusiasm. There were the hardcore people who would argue it to the death that, man, you guys aren't appreciating Demetrius Demetrius, and you're not seeing these flyweights for what they are. But it was a disconnect at some point between the majority of fans, I think. I don't think it was almost. There was a fight card recently, and I don't remember the exact fight, but there was a flyweight fight on it, and it was almost like the crowd started booing instantaneously on stalls of action. And I was like, they wouldn't do this if it was middleweights or something like that. It was almost like they got bored with it before it even got rolling.
So do you think this is ultimately, in a weird way, Demetrius' fault because of the gap between him and everybody else, and the fact that his personality was never crossed over? That in a weird way, people took a snapshot of the division, and all they thought about was Mighty Mouse.
I think it's a combination of what you guys are saying about, the size. I think that matters as well. But to answer your question, why it's popular in boxing and not MMA, I think it's also because I don't think it got promoted properly. I don't think it got given a push. And also, like, why did the UFC create an 135-pound division for women's MMA? Because of Ronda Rousey, right? And you could say the same thing for a certain weight class. Like, there was sort of the certain fighter that brought the it factor. I feel like nobody really brought that into the flyweight division, so there was never really like a huge
that kind of fuels
traction.
what I was really saying. Yeah. Essentially, that it's almost in a weird way Johnson's fault because he was never a crossover guy. If you had 3 people that weren't on Johnson's level, but they could trade the title.
I speculated about this very thing in a piece that ran today. I was saying the sliding doors, the glass door, whatever, the sliding doors theory. Like, Ian McCall hasn't beat in Australia. He's wailing on him. He's talking. Remember that? Let's just say he wins the fight. And Ian McCall, being a little bit more of a fiery guy, very opinionated, has some definitive ideas. Let's just say it became the McCall era from that point on. Would it still be around? That's an interesting way of thinking of it, because you're like, well, then you have a guy who is kind of more of a firebrand, and I'm not sure. That's one of those things, because there is such things as the it factor in the sport. So it's very hard to know how much of a role Demetrius and his basic personality played a role.
Well, let me compare it to this. But the boxing's heavyweight division for a 10-year run with the Klitschko brothers, and nobody else was even close. They didn't have the personalities to carry it. Now they're gone. We've got Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, and Tyson Fury. We're not trying to say they're Joe Frazier, but they're fun.
Yeah, but the Klitschko's, even at their worst, at orders of magnitude better business than Demetrius.
Better business in Germany, not in the States. HBO eventually dropped and got out of that business.
That's where their promoters were based. I mean,
it's also heavyweights. We're talking about.
Here's the thing that occurs to me. I think you're onto something. I always found it a ludicrous argument, because it is a ludicrous argument. But if enough people believe it, then it doesn't matter if it's ludicrous. Which is to say, this idea, it's like, oh, I could, you go to a bar or something, and be like, oh, this guy's a champion, I could beat his ass. And you think to yourself, bro, Demetrius Johnson would Mortal Kombat you so fast. But it's interesting.
I'd love to see it. I would love to
Yeah,
see it
here's
in
the
a bar
thing.
when he did it.
Chocolatito, what weight does he fight at?
He peaked out at 115 is his best weight.
All right, so people, when they watch Chocolatito, they would say something like, he's a tiny guy, but I definitely couldn't outbox him. And as if that they can define the parameters of his greatness in a way where they can understand they don't match. There is something about MMA and the way in which there is a more complete system of fighting that gives people the misapprehension that size is somehow incredibly determinative of overall ability, which makes them say, well, this little guy, what can he really do? And you think about it, you're like, that is so insane. But if enough people believe this insanity, how do you argue against something that people intuitively think is so true and is intuitively absurd at the same time, or rationally, I should say, rationally absurd? I think they're always kind of up against it. The reason why I asked you about also, why is Chocolatito popular? I think, Latin Americans are smaller people. Sorry, Danny, they are.
What are you talking about?
They're not winning any slam dunk contests last time I checked. And I think that they appreciate these different sizes of fighters. It comes more natural to them. Same for the Asians, the Japanese and the Thai, right? They're supporters of their size boxers.
I mean, boxing's big in Latin America.
Exactly.
MMA
it's the king. It's the king.
But you asked a key question that I didn't answer all three times you asked it, and I was poking the beard a little and got really mad. Do you remember that? But you make a great point. Why could 135 be marketable when they're just 10 pounds apart and
Right.
25 never was? I can give you a cheap answer and say, well, TJ and Cody and Dominic Cruz are just outwardly more marketable than Demetrius, but Dana White and the company was really never fully behind 125. They were always behind 135, and eventually, when you treat something like that, it starts at the top. Eventually, it permeates.
This is the other thing that occurs to me. It's like, look, man, it would have been nice for flyweight to have worked out in the UFC. I think we can all agree with that. Number one, I'd say the UFC can barely promote the weight classes that it has. It doesn't need every weight class. Now, there's some other ones I would have maybe gotten rid of before flyweight in some capacity. To your point, women's featherweight, like, what are we doing there? But
go on UFC.com/rankings. Still no rankings.
Well, I mean, who are you going to rank? I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter.
The top three.
But the other thing you have to consider here is, like, if the UFC is not committed to this division, why do you want a promoter that's not invested in this? Like, there's a better steward of this division somewhere else. Now, maybe it's one, maybe it's KSW, maybe it's Cage Warriors. I don't know what the answer is. But to me, it's like, if they weren't going to give it what it was owed, maybe somebody else will. Yeah. Maybe this is in some ways a better way to do it.
Did you find Conor McGregor's tweet interesting when he called out Chatri?
No, I did not. I don't find most of his tweets very interesting.
Misdirected hostility. Doesn't he realize it's Dana White who hates flyweights and Demetrius?
It's like, dude, do you think Chatri said, look, I don't know what to make of one and all the other just grandiose claims that they make. But to blame Chatri Sityodtong for the demise of the UFC's flyweight division is categorically ridiculous. Yeah. So I don't even know what to say about that.
If they named you vice president or comptroller any day soon, I wouldn't be surprised. It seems like they're just hiring flamboyant.
Bro, trust me when I tell you, that'll never happen. Gee, Luke, we would love to get your opinion on things.
Well, they just took one serious personality and brought her in, didn't they? Misha Tate. So
yeah, well, the difference is that Misha Tate is likable.
Yeah, right.
That's the other big hurdle there. Anyway, any final thoughts on flyweight's legacy? But I'll ask you it this way: any favorite flyweight moment? I'll go first. John Dodson versus Demetrius won. Because John Dodson was putting knuckles on him. And it was one of these showcases of flyweight where it's like, wow, these dudes do have knockout power. And these dudes do have great wrestling and jiu-jitsu and the whole bit. And it was interesting. I actually called John Dodson's fight against Demetrius Johnson teammate years ago, Pat Runez. Pat Runez was this guy who was the early Demetrius in some ways, at least out of that Seattle camp. And the fight had the exact same trajectory. John put it on him those first two rounds, and then Pat just kind of fought his way out, winning a decision in the end, and it sort of mirrored that exactly, but it was just a great showcase of talent. Anything for you?
I would just say, I wouldn't say a specific fight, but just Demetrius Johnson's run. I don't think we'll ever see that again. I mean, so many title defenses, and the way he did it, he was the most dominant champion in UFC history, and just the way he did it. And I think that weight class, I know we talk about, 155 being that sweet spot. I think 125, that's where the most technical guys are at. Sure, they're not the biggest, but like you just look at the rankings, everyone's good. Everyone's solid. I never really saw a horrible fighter within the flyweight division. Never. Everybody was pretty well-rounded, pretty solid. And yeah, just to highlight Demetrius Johnson's run, I mean, it was incredible, broke all kinds of records, and historical.
And my moment would be the Borg fight for Demetrius, to piggyback your point. There was a ceiling of, I thought, okay, I finally know how good DJ is, and he's an all-time great, and he's this. But yet he had one more way to wow us with the way that he submitted Borg, with the slam into the armbar. I mean, it's just absurd. And my only lament as a fan with DJ going across the waters to 1 is that we never got him moving back up to bantamweight, specifically when Cruz had regained the belt. And that would have been the ultimate legacy fight, where for all of us people who were like, okay, Mighty is a GOAT, but is he really? Can we really compare him to these other guys? That would have given him that argument, I think, even to the most cynical.
Years on this thing.
I mean, imagine the storylines there. The only guy that beat him. I mean, that would have been, that would have been fun.
I loved it when he caught Horiguchi at the very end of that fight to finish it with like a second left. I mean, to me, that was another one of his mystiques that he was able to bring to the table, was the flair for dramatics in that way. But I mean, the big knock on the flyweights when it first started was these guys won't be able to knock each other out. And I'll always appreciate Joseph Benavidez knocking out Yuri Shitani in that first fight, because it was like, here's a declarative moment where this guy shows power, and then you got guys like Lineker, who was barely a flyweight, he couldn't get down, but it's like you had guys like that showing up, and they had so much power. I like that aspect of it, that they were kind of proving people wrong. The Dynamite does show up in these small packages the whole way, and so I mean, as a whole, I thought there were a lot of really good fights, but those ones stand out to me.
All right, let's talk about a fight that's never going to happen. Once again, Floyd Mayweather is in MMA headlines. It is unbelievable how much of my career in MMA I've had to give to Floyd.
All the flowers just died in the garden.
What the Whiskey Tango Foxtrot was that? All right, so on Sunday night, I'm prepping for the MMA Hour, and I see this weird thing on my timeline. Floyd Mayweather's going to fight Tenshin Nasukawa in Rizin, and you're like, what? And then you dig into the details. They didn't know the weight exactly. Tenshin's in the 120s. They didn't know rules. They didn't know gloves. They didn't know anything. And then no more than 48 hours or so pass, 72 hours pass. Floyd takes to Instagram, is like, psych, you know what? I got misled. But we went and played audio on my show yesterday of the presser. First of all, why would you do a presser if it was for a private exhibition? That literally makes no sense. It's a contradiction in terms. Moreover, in the presser, he was like, I want to reward all the Japanese fans and the Japanese public who have supported me. And Tenshin and I are going to put on a show for you. I understand speaking BS, but either you're lying then or you're lying now, or both. Either way, you come off.
Always lying. That's Floyd Mayweather's gimmick.
So then I'll go to you. I'll go to you on this one. What is your takeaway? You've known Floyd longer than I have. I've covered some of his boxing fights, but you way more. Were you like? What do you make of what happened here? Did you think it was going to happen when they announced it?
Yeah, I thought in some form it was either going to be this absolute crap, everyone wears headgear, 3-round exhibition, let's not touch or hurt each other, like thing that almost didn't matter, or it would fall apart. What I found interesting in the aftermath, I thought it was embarrassing, that statement he put out. But then you start to hear the different takes. The majority of the boxing people in my life and on my timeline were like, oh, we know Floyd too well. He's way too smart. Of course, this was a plan just to give advertisement to Rizin and give advertisement to that 20-year-old 5'5" featherweight that he was going to fight. But the MMA people were like, no, you don't understand. We've covered Japanese MMA. There's gangsters behind this. Floyd couldn't have said anything during the press conference. He had to keep quiet afterwards.
MMA fans introducing the Yakuza boogeyman
I'm just saying,
everything.
I'm giving you the two
most
sides.
Annoying thing on earth.
It was interesting. So you got to basically pick. Do you think Floyd is smarter than we think, or do you think he got fooled? In the end, I don't care and even don't want to pick, because when Floyd's touting, I'm going to fight Conor, or even to a small degree, I'm going to fight Khabib, there's a small redemptive hint of possible competition in an otherwise crappy sort of gas station hot dog buffet that I wouldn't even eat. And now I'm so done with Floyd. I was kind of in on the idea of a Manny boxing rematch. Now I'm done.
You were kind of touting that.
I'm not going to Girl Collection. I'm not doing anything else. Okay, I'm not. No chance. No chance. I'm just saying, can we make a rule that we don't talk about Floyd anymore? Because this is just, for me, I feel half duped. I feel half bad for him, and I can't figure out which one it is.
You
and I
can't
don't
just show up here, start making, no more rules. We're making rules about talking about Floyd. We talk about Floyd all the time on the show, regardless. So.
I know, and not even because we want to.
I know.
Like, I don't bring it up because I'm jazzed to talk about Floyd Mayweather. I'm like, oh my God.
At this point, and I thought this right away when you're hearing it, because it was out of left field. I mean, this whole thing was like so out of left field. I'm like sitting there looking at my phone like, what the hell is going on? It's just that it seemed like a publicity stunt from the very first to me. I was like, this can't be real? And I went on to a radio show with some Irish guys the next morning, and they immediately wanted to talk about that. And it was kind of hard to talk about because you're like, I still feel like I'm taking it with a grain of salt. this doesn't seem like it'll really happen. You know, that sort of thing. I mean, it's just bizarre that you have to go kind of even give it any FaceTime, to be honest, man. And I don't know what the ploy. Like, I've heard both sides, like you're mentioning, but I have no idea what's going on with this at this point. I don't know why any MMA fan at this point would even be interested in what Floyd does.
They just want to see him get viciously knocked out.
I understand that, but there's just a point when, you know, this is a man he's made so much money in the fight game. It's almost like barely comprehensible. Our closest thing is Conor McGregor, but we've seen that fight. It's almost like it's just something completely different for us as MMA people to have to contemplate. But I'm like, at the same time, I don't even care. Like, seeing if he's going to cash in $100 million to get beat up and take a dive or whatever it's going to be, that doesn't even matter to me. At some point, you got to be like, Floyd Mayweather, how old is he now?
41.
41 years old. I'm like, Floyd Mayweather, please, just leave the MMA alone. Go back
Is there
to
any
boxing.
chance between Sunday and when he put that Instagram out that somebody gave him Josh Gross's book about Antonio Inoki and Muhammad Ali, and somebody showed him the YouTube video, and he's like, I'm going to get set up here. I can't do this.
The one dumb theory was, what about the Yakuza? What does that even mean? Yes, I know the Yakuza was involved in Pride. I get that. But if you have no evidence for that, it's just this boogeyman you're inserting to kind of make sense of this dumbass theory. Yeah. The other one was that Floyd, who has, by the way, 85 billion handlers, okay? Literally, when him and Canelo did that tour, remember that when they were promoting it? They came to the Howard Theater in D.C., and I walked outside the media entrance, and in the alleyway, I counted 19 Escalades. 19 Escalades, all blasting AC, and the only one in them was a driver for all of his entourage. That's how
the
he
money
rolls.
Team, bro. All right.
That's how he rolls. So this idea that he walked in there and didn't know what he was doing, and then someone goes, I think he saw footage of Nasukawa, was like, I don't want none of that. Are you high? Are you high? Do you really believe that? Danny, what the F happened?
When I woke up on Monday and I looked at my phone, I'm like, I couldn't believe it. And then when we spoke about it in the MMA, I wasn't convinced. To be honest, I didn't really think it was going to happen because the rules weren't in place. You're telling me that Floyd Mayweather you're going to build a whole press conference with a guy, promote a fight without any rules in place, gloves, everything. To me, right from the start, it felt fake. And I had a feeling like I wasn't going to believe he was fighting him until I actually saw him in the ring or wherever they fought. But something that I do find interesting is that he does still look for the headlines. He does want to be there. And part of me thinks that's because he wants to stay relevant, because maybe he does have one left in him, whether it's boxing Habib,
well, he's very smart
whether
with that stuff.
whether it's going to whatever the case may be.
He would box again, yeah.
I do feel like he's got one more left, and I feel like with everything that's been going on in boxing, because boxing is very hot and MMA as well, he's kind of fallen back. So he wants to stay on the headlines, stay relevant, and so when he does make a comeback, it's not like he's been gone for too long.
Well, look, he got a little butthurt, if you will, when Canelo signed that giant DAZN deal, and suddenly he's putting out all these memes of Oscar De La Hoya and Fishnights, and he's mad. And
him and Oscar are still going back and forth on Instagram.
Yeah. I mean, Conor McGregor was writing him. That in itself already puts his name right in there.
Right,
so.
just like that whole charade that Floyd was going to fight in the UFC. Can we never mention that again as well? But I just
Patty.
There's been some bad pay-per-views and bad circus fights. I think if this fight went through, it would have taken that. Do you remember that Mike Tyson sparring match in 2006? That was an actual pay-per-view against Corey T-Rex Sanders, the fat guy in the shirt with the headgear. And that was a $60 watch Tyson spar for 3 rounds, and it was supposed to be a world tour, and nobody bought it, and they shut it down right away. This would have been worse than that.
This is what we get for allowing Mayweather McGregor. Because once you go into the theater of the absurd and it becomes real, you have no bearing. I'll be honest, there was a part of me that was my brain was compartmentalized. So there was a part of me that was like, how is Rizin even going to pay for this? They can't even
Nothing
pay.
made sense. Nothing.
And then
made
the
sense.
other part of me is like, well, I didn't believe Mayweather McGregor either. But not only did that happen, it made $1 gazillion. So now we're just sitting here in this post. We are through the looking glass on bizarre things happening. It's impossible to decipher what's real, even when your spidey senses tell you, hey, man, I don't know about this one, Because I talked to Javier Mendez this week. He was like, no, for real, we were looking for the Mayweather fight. And then I thought, well, because of the athletic commission trouble, Mayweather must have thought, all right, well, this guy's going to be on ice for a while. Let me see if I can just go get some fight with some dumbass rule set in Japan before the end of the year, make some cash. That's really what I thought it was going to be. And then it just turns out, everyone got scammed.
Including this could be the truth. Who knows?
We have legitimized Nigerian email scams, the equivalent of that in MMA. Now I can't tell if it's a real one anymore.
The only thing crazier would be...
I still click on all of them.
The only thing crazier would be... Wagenheim came back in a Hawaiian shirt and took my seat, that'd be the only thing crazy.
Yeah, that would be crazy. That would be crazy. You are a weird person, Brian Campbell. All right, let's do this. How about Ben Askren back in the news? Well, I guess he never really left for the past few weeks. It is announced that in January, I believe UFC 233, he's going to be, it's not official, but it's believed he's going to be facing Robbie Lawler. Some people I noticed were saying, oh my God, I mean, okay, I'm glad Askren's here. That's great. It's good. And he's always fighting a legit guy. That's great. That's good. But of all the guys you could have picked, this guy, that doesn't make any sense. I hate it. I actually don't hate it. Danny, you like it or you hate it?
I don't hate it, but I do think there probably would have been better matchups. Sean Shadi pointed this out on the A-Side live chat and made a great point is Ben Askren, we want to see him against somebody legit, right? We didn't want to see him against somebody outside of the rankings or anything like that. We want to see him against somebody in the top 10. So that box is checked, right? You're getting the Robbie Lawler fight, who you know is legit. However, Robbie Lawler doesn't, if you look at his social media, he doesn't play game. He doesn't,
I know.
He's the guy
hates media.
he's the guy that falls asleep at press conferences. And Ben Askren wants completely the opposite. So I actually wanted somebody that could, spar with him verbally, put him in there with Colby Covington, Darren Till, anyone. Jorge Masvidal, which you like that matchup. So this one, exactly, if you're trying to build up Ben Askren into a star and capitalize on this huge deal that went down, this is not the appropriate matchup. But nonetheless, it's still not a bad one. I think there probably could have been better ones. But regardless, Ben Askren didn't come here because he was a big superstar and to talk the trash. We came to find out if he's the best welterweight on the planet. That's the real question. And we'll get that answer.
That's why I love it. You do make a great point about the marking, but I love it because this is UFC's history. There's no easy ones when you come in. Who's Lawler right now? You could argue he's Frank Mir when Brock Lesnar came in, right? It was like, oh, you want to do this? Okay, we're going to throw you one. Eddie Alvarez, right? Didn't he get a prime Cerrone right there who had been rebirthed? I mean, this is what happens right here. And I think as much as I would love to see Askren against GSP or anyone else right now, I'm a kind of an Askren super fan. Love the trash talk, love the potential, but it's kind of his fault that he won't fight. The one guy he won't call out is the champion in his own division, his buddy and longtime teammate Tyron Woodley. And I get why. I'm not saying he should, but because of that, you can't really just bring him in as the outsider who may be better than any of your welterweights, and let's find out tomorrow. We're going to put him again against our champion. It's kind of his fault. So you do have to, what are they going to do? If the end game is not Tyron Woodley, and if GSP doesn't look at this as a legacy fight that he needs, and you can't get it, you don't want to do a Diaz brother fight, really, what else are you going to do? It's Lawler. It's fine. Yeah.
I mean, I can appreciate Ben Askren on the other level, the level of just trolling everybody, right? I think that he's one of the masters at it. He has been on the outside looking in for so long. You want to see him go against a guy who's going to give it right back to him in the lead up to that fight. I would have liked to have seen that. And we know that Robbie Lawler, like you mentioned, will not do that. In fact, Robbie Lawler had the easy when Conor McGregor was fighting and was it Jose Aldo and they were fighting in the co-main. It was him and Rory McDonald, which ended up being one of the fights of the decade. But they barely said two words, and he was at home in this. Like he didn't want to have to exchange any words with Rory McDonald. So I feel like, in that sense, you're like, oh, they could have picked anybody besides a guy who's going to just play it silent and give him the silent treatment. Because I know Ben Askren likes a fight before the fight. But you take all that out of it, come fight night, when they're walking in there, I think it's going to be worth it. I think it's a great fight in that sense because Robbie Lawler he's done it against everybody, you know what I mean? And he's a former champion. He hits the way he does. He does have wrestling. He does have those things in his background. So it's really interesting because who's Ben Askren fought that's even near that equivalent? So I can't hate the fight itself.
I would say near equivalent. The nearest equivalent would be Jay Huron, maybe Douglas Lima, but he fought Douglas Lima at a much different version, and Lima's got a really good guard he's willing to play with, so even that's not really fair.
He's got kicks.
Yeah, Koreshkov.
I think you'd still be Koreshkov, but to your point, okay, here's why I like it. Tell me why I'm wrong. Because to me, it's like, and I made this point on my radio show, do I think it's the best fight they could have made? No. Do I think it's a perfect fight? I'm not sure what would be. But I like I'm almost in this day and age where you've got Floyd Mayweather going to Japan and just saying a bunch of random things. I'm almost looking for boring. I'm almost looking for, I want no pomp. I want no circumstance. I want the genuine article. let's see how good he really is. This is a great test for that. Without bullshit, without all these other things involved, I'm going to take you down and steal your manhood. And I get that Ben loves that kind of stuff, and I never want to talk him out of it because it's just who he is. But he won't have that. And that's a bit of a weapon, too, psychologically. Like, the more I think about it, too, about like Conor McGregor, a big component of how he wins is getting guys to just not be themselves. And then when you make mistakes because you're not yourself, then he capitalizes. But if you can't make a guy make a mistake, now how good are you? That is what Ben Askren is facing here. It's almost like dull to the point of perfect. That's kind of why I like it.
We should get Wash Goldie in here to deliver his line from the Bonner Griffin fight. So you want to be an ultimate fighter? Because that's what this is all about for Askren. I love it.
From the UFC's point of view, if you're just looking at it from the UFC's
To your
point of
point,
view.
by the way, Ben thinks that the UFC put him on here because they want him to lose.
That's what I'm wondering.
You buy that?
So possibly, and they also might want to just downplay part of his vitality. Like we're talking about, this could be, UFC operates in mysterious ways, but from the UFC's perspective, you'd almost think that they'd want to put him in a situation where you see him at his full value, lead up and in the fight. You know what I mean? So it's confusing. I don't know if the UFC is playing this for that very reason, which again, this has been Askren is always going to have this attitude. That's kind of counterintuitive, but at the same time, I don't put it past. I mean, him and Dana White have been at odds for years, pretty much as long as I've been covering this sport. So who knows?
All right. Very quickly, UFC 230 was this past weekend. It was, that week murdered me. But neither here nor there. Danny, very quickly, there was a report yesterday by our own Dave Meltzer. And you guys know this better than I do because I don't watch pro wrestling. But my understanding is there's a gentleman who goes by the name of Roman Reigns. He was like the big to-do, right? And he got, he's had leukemia in the past, and it came back. So he held, I think I've got this, Universal title?
Yeah, the Universal Championship, which is Raw's equivalent to the WWE Championship on SmackDown. There's two major belts, whatever.
All right, whatever that means. But he got sick, and he had to relinquish the title. Yeah. Now, at this morally grotesque event in Saudi Arabia, shocker Brock Lesnar shows up, as well as N-word dropping Hulk Hogan. Just too perfect of a coincidence. Nevertheless, Brock now has this title. So Dave Meltzer is theorizing, I think with some good reason, that you might now have lost this Brock fight. Do you share Dave's analysis? I know you're not a big pro wrestling fan either, but it was a pretty compelling case. And if so, does this mean that Jones DC3 is now inevitable?
It's possible. As you said, I'm not huge on pro wrestling, so it's hard for me to, give a super, in-depth analysis on this. But if Brock Lesnar already has to be sort of the main guy for the wrestling world, for that promotion, and he can't cross over to MMA, or at least makes it harder. I mean, the only big fight that's left out there for Daniel Cormier is the John Jones fight. So we'll see what happens with Brock Lesnar, But
they seem to have moved past each other, don't you think? Yes, John.
Yeah.
John's like, yes. DC is like, but I don't know.
Let's talk.
But I mean, if you want to make money, because DC's looking for that big payday, and look, DC's a competitor. He'll fight anybody. He's not trying to get an easy way out. What he's trying to do with the Brock Lesnar fight is make money, right? That's what he's trying to do. But he's not trying to get an easy way out. The only thing available to make big money is that John Jones fight, especially if it's a heavyweight, especially if he's the defending champion, right? So if that's the only thing that's left on the table, I think at some point all things got to give, and those two are going to collide. But the Brock Lesnar situation is interesting because I think it all depends also on the timeline of DC's retirement. If he's willing to push that back, because I believe he said March is the deadline.
20th, yep.
If he pushes that back, I think maybe there's room for the Brock Lesnar fight to happen. If he sticks to that, then you're operating in a very strict timeline where really the John Jones fights is the only one that's available.
To clarify on Meltzer's points here on his reporting, is he's saying essentially because WWE had phased Lesnar out to pop and Reigns up. Reigns is their new Cena. He's their new guy in the lineage of Austin, Rock, all that, whatever. You don't care about that. I know that. But listen to this.
But I get the mechanics. They need someone to replace him now that this guy's sick.
They actually kind of soiled Lesnar's name in the storytelling to try to puff Reigns up higher. Reigns gets hurt, gets sick, he's gone. McMahon panicked and gave the title back to Lesnar, and then secretly, from Meltzer's reporting, re-signed Lesnar to a bigger deal that extends him at least through WrestleMania in April, has to be there for Royal Rumble in January. So
Does that preclude him from fighting?
No, there is language in the contract reportedly that says he can still take a UFC fight. So Meltzer's theorizing essentially, rightfully, that, wow, maybe we won't see Brock come back because Vince has so much money from what he's doing in Saudi Arabia, morally corrupt to a large degree, that it would give Brock a reason not to. But I kind of disagree with that because we know two indisputable facts about Brock Lesnar, right? Number one, none of us are brave enough in here to go up to him and tell him that tattoo on his chest does not actually look like a sword.
I knew you were going to say that.
And number two, the only thing he likes more than money is being a man, challenging himself. Yeah. And WWE can challenge himself to a degree because the hook on him is he makes his fake fights to look real and feel real. The only thing he likes more is challenging himself. Let's not forget when he came back for 200. SummerSlam was the next month. Vince McMahon took a big chance. I could see a scenario where Brock, who barely shows up in his part-time schedule on WWE anyway, could still be in camp, could still fight DC. But do I think it's better for the sport if he does not come back? Oh, yeah. I want DC Jones 3, and I want it now, fellas, meaning the spring. I don't want to wait for DC to retire for 6 months and bring it back. Both of them are talking crap. Both of them know they want it. It's the Ali Frazier of the sport, and you know this man, and there's so many storyline wrinkles that make the third one at heavyweight so much the biggest fight that ever happened, not for Connor's coming back. He just made fun of that guy's religion's reasons. For the other half of that, for the fact that there's so much at stake between two guys that hate each other.
Yeah.
I'm fired up.
I'd like to add that at this point, I know you said they don't seem interested in each other, but I feel like they're kind of trying to, up each other in the sense of, Cormier's like, oh, I'm past him. I'm the heavyweight champion. And John Jones is like, yo, I beat him twice. I don't need him. I don't think no one really wants to admit like, yo, I'm down to fight this guy again. Low key, no, not even low key, high key, they don't like each other. These guys don't like each other. They don't want to
seem thirsty, as the millennials might say.
Exactly. They don't like each other, and that's always going to be there. And I think, if you don't like someone, you want to fight them, and you want to kick their ass.
There's a couple of things. You're talking about the Lesnar thing first. If you go to the Lesnar thing and Vince McMahon and whatever deal they worked, let's not forget that the WWE is talking to Cormier as well. This is they could segue into this very simply by having them fight in the UFC.
About that. Yeah, you're right.
They want Cormier. So it's almost like you could see how they would want to be in a little bit of cahoots on this one, just given the magnitude of that fight versus where Daniel Cormier is going to end up afterwards. You know what I'm trying to say?
MMA fans hate this, and they booed me at the press conference, but Vince McMahon's greatest victory...
He's already talking about him bringing the Universal title into the ring.
That would be Vince McMahon's greatest victory, to advertise it like that. Bring that damn title, that fake title, into the real fighting surface, and that small percentage chance that Brock could win, and then you have the baddest man on the planet.
So I still feel like the fight is probably the forerunner. I still feel like that's probably the forerunner, and I think they'll work it out. But let's say they don't. Daniel Cormier himself basically had a AFC picture playoffs scenario for it. Where this thing is, if it's not Brock Lesnar, then he said his next preference would be to cut back down to 205 pounds, which I think we all have our doubts of, seeing him as thick as he was at 251 on the scale, and challenge John Jones again. Okay, we know that has its own problems within his time frame. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, you could see that as a heavyweight, because what would be the incentive for John Jones to beat a man a third time? To take the heavyweights out of him. So you could see that scenario. And he said if that can't be arranged, he would do the Stipe Miocic rematch. And I believe him on that. I think that he's so 100%. Logical and sensible. I think that he would default down to that, and he would take that fight if that's the first available. But I will say this. The one thing that I think he would probably go back on his word on is if he could get John Jones, let's say he gets Lesnar or he fights Stipe, if he could get the John Jones fight in one way or another, I think that he would stick around longer to get that fight at some point.
All right. That will end that portion of the conversation. Boy, we talked about Floyd Mayweather and pro wrestling. My life is idiotic. All right.
You want to talk bare knuckle? No,
we don't have time. All right, so let's do this. It's time now for our weekly feature.
You didn't forget.
No, I did not forget. These donkeys forget. Like, I don't know what I'm going to come up with. You need to research during the week.
Under the radar stuff.
Under the radar. Time now for a story involving MMA or combat sports and some variety that may have just slipped by you. But we're here to make sure you didn't forget. Chuck, you can go first.
All right. Well, I see that he's finally coming back after a 2-year suspension, being dropped by the UFC only a couple months before this whole thing was in. Tom Lawler is actually going to be fighting again on that.
Filthy.
Filthy Tom Lawler is going to be fighting again on the Golden Boy Enterprises happening.
Yeah, he was calling the card filthy, actually.
Well, both cases are correct, but I think that it's cool to have a guy like that back in there. I always enjoyed him. I think he's a very candid interview, and he's been out there kind of making a living pro wrestling and doing all this stuff. We're back into the wrestling world.
And I'm just teasing. But,
So it's kind of cool to have him back into it, especially given his circumstance and being away from the fight game for so long.
Right.
Danny had the same one I was going to use, but I can quickly pivot and bring up this bare knuckle bonanza that we already know.
What do you know about it?
That the Friday we were supposed to see Johnny Hendricks, who was going to retire from MMA, was going to fight Brennan Ward. Apparently, whichever of the two bare knuckle fighting
This is WBKFF.
reached on their contract. Brennan Ward, the Bellator slugger, pulled out. Sean Merriman, the former NFL guy, pulled out. I'm just going to say this. Bellator is specialized in what I call MMA pornography. There's a market for it. I'm a degenerate guy. I'll be there. I'll even watch in Wyoming cage bare knuckle fighting. Okay, you know what? You joke about my diet, what I'd eat at a gas station, and I do, and I will. But my whole point is I'll watch that. But we don't need two of these leagues because this is the bottom of the damn food chain. So if you're going to have it, can they organize and put it together so that the names that we know in one organization can actually fight the names that we know in the other? And if you're Johnny Hendricks and you're talking about that I have to retire, don't go to the bottom of the food chain and do this bare knuckle crap. You know, thank you. That was a personal statement from me, just an editorial. But I'm not down for two leagues. Come on.
I would go with...
Under the radar, Danny.
So Brian and I had the same one. Anthony Johnson. He said that, you know, he's down to come back. First of all, if nobody has seen Anthony Johnson the way he looks like now, you thought he was big. You got to go to his Instagram. He's huge now. So he's saying that basically he's down to have another MMA fight. It'd obviously be at heavyweight, and it's either going to be against Daniel Cormier or John Jones. Those are the only two that he wants to fight. And I think that's interesting. I'd like to see him come back. I think at heavyweight it would be fun because I saw him fight at heavyweight under Arlovsky, and I thought that was a crazy fight. It was fun. And I'd love to see him fight at heavyweight. But, you know, who knows if he'll actually get that, you know, John Jones or Daniel Cormier fight. He's got 2 losses to Cormier. Maybe the John Jones one. I don't know. But it is an interesting story.
That'd be a fun heavyweight debut for Jones, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, certainly would be. My under the radar, this one pains me to say, but I have to say it. My former co-worker on the set of Spike TV's MMA Uncensored Live, Craig Carton, was convicted in a federal court in New York City this week of a variety of crimes, taking money essentially from a hedge fund and then using it to pay back gambling debts, forging documents, and a variety of other things. He appears to be guilty of sin and is facing up to 45 years in prison. It kills me because I met his kids and they were wonderful. I met his wife. She was lovely. I'll just say this, you know, look, it appears he did the crime, and I am a big believer that this country does not prosecute white-collar crime nearly as much as it should. And the evidence, I mean, the jury took 4.5 hours to deliberate. I mean, it seemed like he was overwhelmingly guilty. So he claimed he had been scammed by another defendant who had also been convicted of 6.5 years for all kinds of fraud. In any event, I'll just say this about Craig. It appears, like I said, he's incredibly guilty, and if so, then, you know, you have to do the time, right? And I don't have any sympathy for him. I will say, though, that I do think he was always misunderstood in MMA. He was incredibly helpful in my career and gave me some opened up some doors for me majorly, and was always really nice. And there's a famous clip of him having this shouting match with Overeem on the set of MMA Uncensored Live, and there's like all these downvotes on YouTube, and you read the comments, and it's like, F this guy, who does he think he is? Understand that when the cameras went off, he and Overeem had a great laugh, backslapped, and went and had drinks together. Like, fans...
Come on, kayfabe only.
Well, hold on, here's the thing. Fans in MMA don't understand sports radio. Sports radio is about being aggressive, tough guy, in your face. In MMA, they always say, we want the media to tell the truth. No, you don't. You want media that's deferential to power. You made it clear over and over again, and he was never that way. And they didn't understand him. So, in the end, I guess the fans get the last laugh on this one. It kind of breaks my heart, to be honest. I feel a bit bad for his kids, but, you know, you steal millions of dollars from people, you know, you're not a good person.
2 spikes in a row. Last time was Kevin Kay, and now the Craig Carton.
Yeah, I guess now I'm due for some kind of upending.
Under the radar about how Luke is off the show.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden I've been fired from all my jobs. I don't know why I'm here. All right, we are not done. We have taken your tweets and we have put them together in a list, an amalgamated list. We are now going to answer them on a segment we call After the Beat. As always, you can use the hashtag #TheMMABeat to send us those. I have selected a one extra this time. We usually do about 7 or so. We've got 8 this time. One that is going to annoy Chuck Mindenhall.
Yes.
I cannot wait to share it with him.
So fun.
Don't go anywhere. After the Beat starts right now. And we are back after the beat. I'm Luke Thomas, Danny Segura, Brian Campbell, and in the end, Chuck Mindenhall. We have been taking your tweets using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. It is now time to answer them. All right, here we go. No, first one up, no time to waste. Danny, I'll start with you. What do you see as Miesha Tate's impact on it's actually one championship.
Right.
It was announced that she's going to be the vice president. Knowing in very one championship fashion, they just declared her to be the vice president. Like, of what? It's like saying, I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
What do you do? Radiology? Are you a surgeon? What do you do?
Yeah.
What do you make?
Well, from the recent signings that they've had, it looks like they're trying to appeal more to this part of the world, obviously with Eddie Alvarez, Demetrius Johnson. And Miesha Tate, she's a very popular fighter. She's one of the best women, female fighters on this planet. So I think it's part of that. It's trying to bring in that audience and trying to just not focus less on Asia, but just, have a more broad, reach. And, I think Miesha Tate, with her signing and making her VP, that's what they're trying to achieve, and that's the type of audience they're trying to bring in. Plus, she's doing a lot of media now. She works in media.
She works with me at SiriusXM. Yeah. She did the commentary for Quintet.
She's done some Fox.
She's done some Fox stuff as well. So
they have now a voice here in the U.S. in that big market. So
although I think it would require her to move to Singapore. I think she has to move there.
Yeah, it's a decent power move for PR purposes to put a face. But I think the next step is North American TV deal of some kind. You want to lap PFL or WSOF or whatever and get into that core. You got some faces now.
She trained with Matt Hume as well.
I think she started out in the Seattle area.
I mean, it just seems like in some ways Matt Hume is just kind of populating.
He's a quiet power player.
He is, man. That's kind of the way I looked at it. I was like, wow, look at Matt Hume just kind of putting his people in places of power, and good for her. I guess we'll see how it plays out because I really don't know. It's hard to predict.
Look, I've got to know Miesha a little bit from SiriusXM. She's bright, super hardworking. Remember, she was doing some managerial stuff as well.
That's right.
Again, I don't know exactly what she'll be doing because they didn't tell us, but I bet she's up for the challenge big time. So
yeah, I agree with that.
All right, next. Okay, Brian Campbell. What is the best bad fight you've ever seen? For me, it's Emmanuel Yarborough versus Daiju Takase for its sheer level of awful, hilarious #TheMMABeat. Now, the obvious answer is always going to be Dada versus Kimbo.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you have a choice beyond that one?
You mean first one's to hard stop lose? I mean, that's just, talking about a last man standing match.
Brian Campbell is a brutal analyst.
I love sloppy fights. There's so many sloppy fights. Can I get a minute to rank my top 5?
Any in boxing that stand out to you?
Yeah, all of them that are sloppy. Are we talking about fights where guys shouldn't have been in there together, where it's more of the Bellator level match?
You get to define it. How about that?
I don't really know if I have one. This is not good live TV. I'm sorry. I just, I like them extra sloppy. Chuck, you got any that jump out at you?
First of all, when Screech did the celebrity boxing thing, that was awesome.
Well, if we're going to that level, I don't know if we're like thinking of those type of, because there's a lot of those celebrity things which are pretty bad. But if you look at, what was the Nate Quarry one, obviously, where it was like the Running Man?
Nate Quarry and
of course, that ended up being fun in its own way too. Yeah, Nate Quarry,
Caleb Starnes,
right? Exactly. Yes.
Where he did this bit.
Yeah. He made it like. It was pathetic, but it was also kind of funny at the same time. So that one always springs to mind when I'm thinking of these types of things. That Ngannou fight, man, like the one that just happened, I think it's just because of the expectations, but it couldn't have been a 180, a complete opposite of what you're expecting in that fight. So therefore, it seems to me a mortifyingly bad fight. Like, you know what I mean? When you look at it back on it, how did that ever happen?
They want to know what fights we love, though. It's all early UFC. Who doesn't love putting on the early UFC and seeing these?
Where are you guys on, like, the Japanese use of the giants? So, like, Giant Silva and then the Hungman Choi.
Jose Canseco.
Jose Canseco. Yeah,
see, if you want to break it, it's like, do you break it into the novelty ones like that? I don't know.
Yeah. The Don Fry one is insane.
Yeah.
The Don Fry versus...
I never get the guy.
You mean the gentleman whose ear got ripped off?
Well, they just punched.
Takayama.
They had the hockey fight. They had the hocky fight for 5 minutes until the other guy dropped.
Is that a sloppy fight though? And that's not a bad fight. That's an awesome fight.
Well, it's insanely sloppy in all the great ways, though. What are you going to saying they had great technique holding the back of the other guy's head? It was as sloppy as you could. You could
okay, but that's not a bad fight. It's not a bad fight. Is just like, what is this ridiculousness?
All right, so they want to know our guilty pleasure favorite bad fight. All right.
It's hard to think, man. If you just go on YouTube and just watch any of the Kimbo Slice's street fights in Miami, those are all sloppy, man.
I saw
those
one.
are fun to watch.
I think we should answer this question after the Liddell-Tito fight because we may have a new leader in this category.
I went to a regional fight once where the facility didn't have air condition, and they had one of those canvases that was covered in ads. Like the whole thing was just a giant ad. And so 1 minute into the fight, these guys are all sweating. It was like, you ever seen those Japanese game shows where they try to get the people to climb to the top of the stairs and the stairs are completely greased? It was like trying to fight on one of those surfaces. They had to stop the fight in between rounds and get someone to towel it off. And I was like, I don't know what this does to the fight. I don't even know if that's legal, but probably a good idea to do that. I've seen stuff like that. Craziness.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, of course, Kimbo Dada was...
That's a tough one. There are, I mean, you could come up with a bunch if you really wanted to think about this question.
It's mostly at the regional or like Japanese level where they just accommodate that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But UFC is kind of hard to think of. But the Caleb
a lot
Starnes,
of the
Nate
Bob
Corey
Sapp
one.
fights in Japan.
Oh, Bob Sapp just gets punched once and he turns into Sergio Ramos.
Well, no, before he actually did that, he was a tough guy, man. He would take a lot of
hits. Fight's amazing.
He fought in a kickboxing, but I think it was the Korean giant.
Hong Man Choi?
Yeah, I think so. In kickboxing, that was a fantastic fight. It was sloppy.
He fought Hoost as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Bam Bam Bigelow.
Oh, when chemo took his heart and soul. Yeah, Bam Bam was on drugs.
Bam Bam,
money, reportedly. Yeah.
Wait, what happened?
Bam Bam Bigelow was an old pro wrestler who tried his hand in an MMA fight. And
what happened?
Chemo took him right down, sat on his face, and just punched the crap.
Yeah, it was really sad.
Really?
It was a brutal
It was a
ground
sad
and pound.
thing.
Absolutely brutal. Sad, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. If
You're
you
like, sounds awesome. What are you talking
going
about?
through the annals of all that stuff, you could probably come up with about 100 of these.
All right, next. Chuck, who has the best chance of being the next Oceanic champion out of Volkanovski, who's got a fight coming up against, who did they announce him this week?
Chad Mendes.
Oh,
that's a tough one,
Tuivasa, and then, of course, Israel Adesanya, who just had about the performance of a lifetime on Saturday.
I'll tell you what, man. I know everybody's high on Israel Adesanya right now as well. They should be, but all of those cats, I think, could be. Like, I think all of those guys have a chance to do it. But I'll still go with Israel because I think watching him, like, this was the escalation moment for him. Like, he's in a big spot, Madison Square Garden. There's just so many weird mental factors. There's scrutiny all over this fight. People want to see if he can show up. And he pulls that off against Derek Brunson, who was trying to tear us up. And it looked a little weird there for a minute, too. It looked like Brunson was going to use his size and his strength a little bit to make it a little uglier. And instead, he just gets styled on. And, I mean, once it happened, you could see Adesanya slow the fight down in his mind. And every time I see somebody do that, like, instead of pouncing like a person who can't wait and is just going to blow his wad that quickly, you see him calculate and just all of a sudden it becomes surgical and precise. Yeah. When I saw that, I was like, that dude is going to be a future champion. So I'm not going to go against him.
No, there's one answer. And anybody that didn't watch the interview with him and you on Monday should watch it to just get a piece of that the personality and the brain matches the amazing style and technique. And, I had a chance to interview him at Media Day last week. And I try in these moments when somebody is the next shiny toy, and I've gotten my heart broken, as we all have in MMA or boxing or whatever, where you get behind a guy, but he doesn't really have it. I tried to press him in my interview with him, kind of push him a little, see what I got. He's the real. He's the real. He's 3 steps ahead on everything he says, certainly in how, what he talked to you and how he breaks down these fights. He's 2 or 3 moves ahead, but I mean, as he told me, I spit bars, and he's just creative, and he's it. He's the one guy.
Yep, I agree with these guys. Adesanya has to be the guy on that list. Tuivasa is doing well, but he had a really close fight with Andrei Arlovski. He still has a bit left to prove. I feel like with Adesanya is like, he proved and over-delivered. We're like, whoa, so how good can this guy be? But somebody I would like to add to the list, Dan Hooker. I think he's got a solid shot.
Yeah, he's good, too.
He's very good. He's young. He's developing. And he's also good on the mic, and he has the whole package.
Yep. Volkanovski doesn't. Pat Wyman, formerly of Heavy Hands podcast and a lot of other places, he loves Volkanovski. I do too. I believe that Volkanovski is probably a title contender. I'm not saying he can't be more than that, but I just need to see more to be sure. But Israel Adesanya, as you mentioned, you spent 5 minutes talking to that guy, and you realize you said it on Saturday. He's not bluffing. And I've never seen a guy just do everything you're supposed to do correctly. Like, I mentioned before, there's a lot of fighters who don't like doing media. He just does it. There's a lot of guys who don't understand the opportunity when the mic gets put in front of him after a fight and, Joe Rogan's talking to him. He gets it. Going to the press conference, he gets it. training the right way, doing all the things you need to get better. He gets it. Like everything you're supposed to do, he
There's a
just kind of
sinister
gets.
edge underneath him. And I don't mean it like he's doing bad things behind the scenes. I'm saying there's like that sinister gruff that you need to be a destroyer. And you see him in the cage. He's playing with his food. I mean, he's setting guys up in ways, not going with full power shots, really just trying to stretch things out to prove points. I mean, he's a sick dude.
You ever seen a big cat get fed? Like at a zoo? They'll throw like a giant piece of meat and you'll see the cat. It'll go and like touch it like this. Like that. And you think, oh, cute little kitty playing with it. And then once it begins to bite and tear into it, just shreds it to pieces.
Seems like an apt comparison. I can see that.
By the way, can you imagine him and Jacare as a final test before
would
a
be-
title shot? Wow.
I love that
That's
fight.
deep end of the pool. That'd be
I
fantastic.
love that fight.
Love that they're
Anderson
talking.
Silva.
No one wants to see the Anderson Silva fight.
I want to see it. I know there's people that want to see it.
Donks.
Just because we don't agree.
Look, I have to be slanderous and unfair. That's
right.
my bit.
Yeah.
All right, next.
That's fair.
That's who I am. All right. What were your reactions to Sharice David's victory for Kansas's 3rd Congressional District? This, of course, was the former female MMA fighter. She won in true red territory, I believe. Native American. I believe she is lesbian and former MMA fighter. Yeah. I don't know anything about her race. What I mean by that is the congressional race. I don't know what she ran on or anything like that, but I have to say the thing I took away from it was, sometimes you begin to think that the MMA community is so narrow in its diversity, and maybe some ways that it is, but fighting attracts a weird cross section of people.
Yeah.
And it just tells you that there are all kinds of people in this community. Mark Wayne Mullen is already in Congress. He fought MMA. He's on the other ideological side of the spectrum. He's a true red Republican and from Oklahoma. And yet here we have this common denominator. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. Do you guys have any takeaways about
It's a
that?
cool little victory for MMA, and you read her backstory and her qualifications. Like, this is an impressive individual, an Ivy Leaguer. I mean, so it's kind of one of the. It reminds me of those times around '06 where UFC would be like, "You don't understand. This isn't boxing. Our guys are college educated.
Yeah.
Chuck Liddell has an accounting degree, and it's like those were like forced in your face. These are one of those where it's like, oh, that's good to see for MMA.
I thought it was cool, like, because you see people like Charles Pierce talking about it, and all of a sudden he's talking about MMA. We should kick your ass. I love when people like that, the cross intersection, when people who would not talk about MMA or even deign to acknowledge it. Find themselves talking about it in a familiar way.
And it made her cooler. They were like, not only is she the first Native American woman in Congress, but she'll beat your ass. She's an MMA fighter. And they kind of presented it as like a kind of thing. Like a Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah. I would say, it's like a small victory, especially like in MMA where, a lot of these fighters are, especially after their career, they're attached to bad headlines, whether it's, DUI or, domestic violence and all kinds of things. Man. You got somebody out there doing something positive, and that represents the MMA community, so it's cool.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. By the way, did you guys see the body cam footage on the Stephen Bonner thing?
Oh, wow.
Dude, man, I mean, he needs help. He needs some help.
That was crazy.
I've done some ill-advised things with alcohol.
Pre-Facebook, yeah.
But I've never done that. That's just a whole new level of.
Picked the wrong set of guys. And that was what he said
was
on
that
I don't know what that was
about?
about.
So people said he said that, but I played that clip over and over again. I am 99% certain that's not him.
No, it's not him.
It's the other people. It was the other citizen arrest.
It was the citizen arrest, which that's why it was so puzzling. They're like,
TMZ was like, he said that. I'm like, I don't think he did. I don't think he could move his vocal cords. He was so out of it.
Exactly.
All right, next. All right, who wants this one? Is Dan Miragliotta slowly turning into Mario Mazzagatti?
Whoa, that's like a
didn't want to called the KO. We got some conjugation issues from Reyes against OSP, and now made huge mistake against Weidman with a horrible stoppage. Who wants that one? All right, I'll go first. Here's the thing I try to make a point about, and I think the referees get bitter at me, but it's like you have to call the stoppage bad for what it is. So, for example, in the CB Dalloway fight against the Russian gentleman whose name I've forgotten now, where Herb was doing it, it was a bad stoppage by Herb. I mean, there's just no other way to call it. It was really, really bad. Here's the thing that I don't think fans understand. It's not that you need to be accommodating of bad. You have to call it out for what it is and do the best you can to correct it. And if someone is habitually really dangerous, like a John Shorley, then they don't need to be behind, or rather inside that cage. On the other hand, like, have you been to regional MMA fights and seen their refs? Like, Herb Dean is what it looks like to be a good referee.
Yeah.
Dan Miragliotta is what it looks like to have a good referee. It's like, it's not quite Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, but it's like Kirk Cousins, he just throws
tough,
picks. I mean, that's just what it is. Like you're not going to get this kind of like totally, they never really, make bad errors. They're going to make really bad ones. That's just what it means to be good. It's that hard to do.
You're a human being and you're using your best judgment in a situation and you're using your best eye. Because these guys have been doing it. The guys we're talking about have been doing it forever. But in that specific instance, when Weidman went down, from where I was sitting, I could not see that he was out. Like TV people saw that right away. It just looked like he went down. That's all that I could see. So when he wasn't, the only thing that gave me a tip-off was that Jacare was kind of like, hey, I'd prefer not to keep punching him, that sort of thing. So I was like, what is going on here? So when Miragliotta, that might have been the part where he could have looked maybe at Chris Weidman like, hey, man, is he, and made that split decision. The fact that he took those hammer fists, I don't know how many of them landed. I didn't really go back and watch that part of it, but like they took those hammer fists, that made it look that much more egregious to me. But it's so tough, man. All of these guys, like, the inexplicable one was Herb Dean, like something like that, where there's just no return fire. You're almost like, what is he waiting for? You're trying to understand what's going through his mind. Yeah. But in something like this, man, if he doesn't see his eyes rolling back in the back of his head, he may just think he's knocked down. And I
just thought the way Weidman fell was really bad.
Yeah,
when he fall like a mannequin, like a Terry Edom.
And also, for those who have wrestled, when you're going for a low single, you can't just go soft. You got to go all out. And Weidman was just kind of hanging on there, and that tells you that he's not fully there.
Yeah.
So we're humans, man. People make mistakes, and it's not like soccer where you see an offsides if the player's past the defensive line. It's an easy call. A lot of the MMA
they still get that wrong, but I know what you mean.
It's subjective,
Yeah.
So it is a tough job, but back to the Herb Dean example, he was refereeing the Adesanya Brunson fight, right?
Who?
Herb Dean.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic stoppage.
He did a great job.
And that was a fantastic stoppage. You see Brunson just taking enough damage, and you could have let that fight go on, but as soon as it got stopped, you see Brunson's face, and he's not complaining about a bad stoppage, and you go, man, that was a perfect stoppage.
I pointed this out before. Referees are like offensive linemen in football. Like, the only time you hear their name really is when something went wrong.
Yeah.
If they're doing their job, you don't even know who was reffing that fight. You know what I mean?
Or when they get arrested for weed.
Yeah.
Hey, he's back now.
Good to see.
And that's all. Didn't California pass full legalization?
He's one of the better refs.
I know,
Josh Rosenthal?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was truly one of the better
Lester
refs.
Carwin, there's his number one.
By the way, the last thing about Herb, I do think he did an excellent job in the Brunson fight, which makes, to your point, like, how did he miss that one in the CB Dalloway where the guy's just showing him his back and covering up, and you're just letting it go? He did it one other time that stands out, and it actually involves Chris Weidman. It was the Rockhold fight.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I really wonder what kind of damage Chris Weidman took from that and how much that has affected him.
Well, I mean, now he's on 4 or 5 fights since. He's not ever. This was the closest he came to, I thought, to looking like himself.
He looked good in the Romero fight. People don't remember that because he got viciously KO'd, but he won those first 2 rounds pretty cleanly in my judgment.
Okay.
I mean, he looked good in the Gastelum fight.
Yeah, and then he got dropped, but then he came back. But if you go back and watch the Rockhold fight, man, that was a solid minute where you were like, this could have been called off.
Yeah.
Anyway, food for thought, I suppose. All right, next. Who wants this one? Do you believe the WMMA 145 division, I'll go to Brian on this one because he was hating earlier, has more value, financial and otherwise, than the men's 125 division? Why or why not, Brian Campbell?
No, it does not have more value. It has equal or lesser value. There's no one there unless you want to blow up some faded 135s. And look, I mean, I'd be okay if like a Kat Zingano got blown up and given a title chance, but that seems to be the only people available to get title chances. There's no one in that division. I get why you created it. Cyborg has had a run. I don't know what you would then do if you canceled the divisions. You just drop Cyborg or only put her in catchweight fights for people that want to see it. Just look, if you're not even going to commit and put rankings up there and you're going to continuously put her, although I obviously love the Nunez, if you're going to continuously put her against people that we've never heard of, then it's just, drop the damn division.
Let me play devil's advocate. Name a flyweight fight that ever did better business than Holm versus Cyborg.
Well, okay, that's a one-off though. Yeah. I mean,
Is that a one-off?
Holmes still had the Rousey rub. I mean, it's still a.
Here's my point. I think generally flyweight offers you more value, but the upper bound limit has already been proven to show you at women's featherweight that it's higher.
I mean, it kind of comes down to also like what defines value. Like, do you need?
Good point. Yep.
Do you need fights to fill out cards because women's featherweight is not really there? It's non-existent. So it's worthless as far as that. But if you're looking for headliners, I mean, Cyborg is a drawish.
I was going to say that's really what it comes down to, right? You have Cyborg, which is the whole reason for the creation of that division, but she is compelling enough where people know who she is and they will pay to see her
She's
fight.
got a highlight reel, man.
Which I'm not sure you could make the case for anybody on the the men's flyweight division.
Currently, anyway.
Yeah.
She doesn't need a featherweight belt. She almost needs like an old school UFC super fight championship where it's just like, if you fight Cyborg, you have a chance to beat the greatest woman of all time.
Any way
and be
you
the new
want.
pound for pound number one. So yeah, open weight division. Here we go.
By the way, if they ever find a way to make that Kayla Harrison Cyborg
That
fight,
would be something, right?
telling you, bro. Telling
Yeah.
you. That's going to be ridiculous.
Yep, I agree.
All right, next.
It'd be fun.
Chuck, this one's for you. You can only listen to one album the rest of your life. What is it? And don't give me this, is it a country album? Is it a rock album? Is it
a
an
rap
album
album?
with 10 songs
What
or 8
genre are
songs?
we talking about?
Answer the question.
So,
And it can't be a greatest hits. It's got to be a studio album, okay?
No, it could be any album you could go and purchase.
there's a couple good ones. Replacements, Let It Be
Yes.
would be
yes.
right up there. I'd say you could say
Boy, we
White
have-
Album.
We have wildly different tastes.
Well, I mean, I love it.
White Album's good. White Album's good.
But see, this is where it's always hard because I could go down each genre.
yeah, but I'm not asking you to rank them. I just want yours. There's no wrong answer.
Those, I would say those are right up there, man, where I really love the albums. There's, I'll start with those two.
Yeah, Abbey Road by the Beatles, Exile on Main Street, The Stones. How about Blonde on Blonde by Dylan? Can I go wrong there?
I'll throw out there Chicano Adman's first album, which you guys have probably never heard of.
Yes.
I can listen to that thing for days. Not get, the key here
Pantera.
is getting an album that you can't get tired of.
Yeah.
Because if that's
Yes.
the only one you can listen to. So it's not really the one you like the most, but the one you can listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not making a claim it's the best album, just the one that I can just leave on rotation. Easily got to be Vulgar Display of Power.
I got it. I said it. I said Pantera.
And then, well, in that category, 40 Ounces to Freedom by Sublime could just be on a list.
That's another real.
But I will
You know what?
say,
That's a good
but
sneaky
see,
call.
if I'm in that genre, I agree with you. If I'm just over on that side, I'm thinking like, okay, I can pick one from this genre. I'm going to pick that one as well. I love
Oh,
that.
10 from Pearl Jam is probably really the answer in all the categories. Sorry. Besides Drowning Pool or whatever you just said.
Drowning Pool.
Why? Like, here's what I understand. My taste in metal is impeccable, and then you bring up like new metal, garbage pail kid nonsense
Sorry, I meant POD. Sorry.
that I would never associate myself with. You act like I'm just like the cousin of Limp Bizkit or something.
I love that sweatshirt.
Yeah, why don't you go to a Dixie Chicks concert, loser?
Wow,
Yeah,
wow.
that's right. Dying Fetus. How about that? When we're on them, I could do Descendant to Depravity.
Yeah.
I could do
What a week for the studio. Adesanya said the C word about 15 times, and now that.
Dying Fetus. I could do Reign Supreme. I could do Wrong One to Fuck With. I could do a lot of those. They're all pretty good. Yeah,
That's a pretty good one.
they're good albums.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what? You didn't. I thought you were going to have much more consternation about this. You let me down.
Well,
I thought you'd be like, "What do you mean? What kind of movie?"
I thought I would actually say something.
No hip hop across
Can't
the
win.
board.
Even when I try to trick you, I can't win. I think we have one more. Okay, a question for the entire panel. Yeah, I believe this is the last one. What was it that turned you towards MMA media as a profession? If you could cover any other sport, what would your ideal choice be? Let's start with the first one. Who wants to go on this one? What was it that turned you towards MMA media as a profession?
Well, for me, it was pretty simple. I grew up reading, fight game chronicling that was really well done. I mean, and so you thought like this is an endless fighting in general has so many angles. It almost never exhausts itself. There are always going to be things to talk about in a literal fight. So I read that stuff growing up. I loved all sports, but I think I was turned on mostly by the writers of the old boxing days. And I thought, as MMA evolved, I thought, hey, you know something? Because I was in different forms of media before I got into MMA, but there was just a point where I was like, I don't really see voices in MMA. So at some point you're like, maybe I would like to be the voice of, or try to be a voice in MMA and kind of talk about it the way the Mailers and the Plimptons and the Lieblings and those guys did back with boxing in the day. So for me, it was more like that.
Yeah, I got an illegal cable box right around UFC 2 and was able to have parties at my house and watch all the way through till it got banned.
How old are you?
40. I'm a man. Look, come at me. But my point on that is that I've always been a boxing guy. I became a boxing editor and writer at ESPN, and then I had the chance to become the MMA editor and work on with great guys like Josh Gross, Brett Okamoto, Chad Dundas, Chuck Mindenhall.
I was going to say, do you remember
Franklin McNeil and
I forgot you guys used to work together.
Yeah.
oh yeah, and and it was
Chuck is there not
it was an
even-
easy crossover to add that.
Danny?
For me, I always loved media, and then I was just a huge MMA fan.
social
And then-
media?
Of course, yeah. Only Twitter, Facebook, yeah. But I've always loved making like little videos, and in high school I was in a film class and whatnot. And then I was just happened to be a huge MMA fan, and something that attracted me to work in MMA media was like, I love soccer, but like, if you look at like those soccer press conferences or interviews with these players, they're so boring. They say the same thing. They're always just so upbeat. Yeah, we lost the game, but next one we're gonna, With MMA, it's like you get so many interesting stories and there's so many stories to tell. And that's what I love. Like, you talk to any fighter and everybody has a very distinct story, and they're very open. There's still not that PR barrier there that, that stops you from getting to know them and telling their story. So that's what really attracted me.
I'll tell you, my story is and I mean this sincerely, is failure. I've had successes in my life in a variety of different personal and professional capacities, but most were pretty unremarkable.
Shaving.
No, I mean, seriously, like things you could do well in academically, I did pretty good. Things you could do well personally, I did pretty good, but there's nothing that ever really stuck out. And then, I always had an obsession with the martial arts, and I decided to, start my own little blog. And then I got picked up to run Bloody Elbow before it was anything. Like, it was just a domain name, essentially. And it just took off. Like, it was a success. And it was the first time in my life that I was ever like really good at something, and I loved it at the same time. So I said, well, I like it and it's going well. Let's just see how far we can push it. And here we are, these many years later, and still doing it.
I do believe to this day, and I appreciate this component, that MMA is kind of like that place where the disenfranchised can warm their hands around, and so many people who came from other walks of life that weren't fitting in or whatever, they can come into this world and somehow find a spot for them. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I feel like that is I feel like the media formed in a very similar way that you're talking about. I feel like the media was a collective of people who came from other areas. They just found their way here. There's very few people. Maybe now there's another generation coming up behind that grew up wanting to be MMA media. But I feel like
are you saying it was started by rejects, essentially?
Kind of.
No. Well, the thing is,
even the fighters themselves.
I had a good job before I got into MMA, but I hated it. I hated everything about it. I was so stressed at that job. It's a true story. All my fingernails fell out. And I went to the doctor and I was like, do I have AIDS or something? And they did a bunch of tests. They're like, no, do you have stress? And he was like, yeah. I do have stress. And it was just terrible for me. And that's when that's exactly when I got pulled into Bloody Elbow. And then month over month, the traffic went like that. And I could not believe that finally a plant grew in the garden. All my plants, always metaphorically speaking, died. Not that one. That one grew. So I just pushed it.
By the way, I'm still in love with the illegal feeling. That's why I love the UFC 25. I want to see bring back the past. I love that gross illegal feeling. My black box, I was watching UFC pay-per-views. I also got the Spice Channel. So I love that gross feeling on there. You know?
There's also, it's still an anti-PC pursuit. I think that is a big deal for me.
Still.
I was always like that. So it's like there was a sport that was thriving as an underground thing that people were preserving. They were getting mad if you weren't protecting its taboo nature, which I appreciated.
And then the other question was, and we'll end it right here, if there was another sport you could cover, what would it be? Danny, you want to go first?
I'd do soccer.
Yeah.
Soccer.
In what capacity? How would you like to cover soccer? There's a lot of different ways you can.
Yeah. Just analysis, breakdown of there's this SB Nation podcast, Los Colchoneros. It's dedicated to Atletico Madrid, who is on top right now.
Is this in the Enter the Calderon? Or
Into the Calderon. I guess they should change it now into the Wanda.
Yeah, whatever.
So they basically just get together and talk about what's going on within the team and the latest news and everything, and they just tackle. And occasionally they do interviews with soccer players, but analysis would be big for me. Yeah.
I'd do the NBA. That's my non-fighting.
Yeah, is that right?
Insane.
Who's your team?
Love Celtics.
You would love them.
I would.
Captain White America over there.
How dare you?
How about Jamal Murray hanging 48 on the Celtics? I'm a Nuggets guy. But I'd probably be, basketball I really like too.
Yeah?
I think
You're
I could
a
write
Nuggets
about
guy,
basketball,
right?
but I do find it to be kind of, again, fight game offers such a broad spectrum of things you can jump into, whereas I find NBA to be finite. The storylines, even though The Ringer has like 20 voices for, the NBA and one guy writing about combat sports, I still find it to be the opposite. I'd probably take that, but I think I could do baseball or football. I could do anything, but I could do baseball as well.
Baseball's dead.
No, but see, that's why you take that.
Only I have an interesting answer relative to the conventionality of you three. I would cover strength sports. I think strongman can blow up in this country with guys like Thor from the Game of Thrones, Brian Shaw, 4-time world's strongest man. They promote that sport so poorly, but it's just, you want to talk about crazy stories to tell? Oh my God, these guys. And by the way, they purposely don't drug test, so these guys are all just juiced to the tits. It's incredible. I love that. The World Championships in weightlifting are happening right now, which is an Olympic sport. Lady Solis from Colombia took bronze. There's amazing athletes in that one. Powerlifting is totally not unregulated. They have sanctioned and non-sanctioned federations, but it's this Wild West. And all of these sports have virtually no media covering them. But then when you talk to their athletes, they're all self-promoters. They all have YouTube channels, and they all have hundreds of thousands and millions of followers. It's this completely underground world that is very interesting, very much uncovered. And if I didn't do MMA, I would be a part of that for sure.
Also, I would like to add, I know it's still combat sports, but jiu-jitsu is getting very interesting.
It is, yeah.
For a while, the coverage was just, I mean, there wasn't much to cover. Now, with all the events outside of like the major ones, all the pay-per-view events, is getting pretty interesting. And the personalities too. It's getting more MMA.
Gordon Ryan Gordon Ryan's by the way, Kasai Grappling going up against Felipe Pena, which is a big rematch from the last ADCC. I actually think of all the flow verticals, I think flow grappling is probably the most comprehensively good. To be I mean, flow combat, they're out there doing their thing, but flow grappling is that's the industry leader, insofar as I can tell. So,
all right, jump up, and get down. Isn't that the phrase?
What?
the catchphrase.
Are you literally just saying random things now?
I gotta use the restroom so bad. It's fourth floor
gas station.
You're like that guy who looks at the Magic 8 Ball. Things will happen on your Tuesday. All right.
That's his catchphrase. What is it?
All right. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Keep sending those tweets using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We always appreciate it. That's it. That's all we got to say. I'll see you guys on Monday for the MMA Hour. Until then, that's Chuck, that's Brian, that's Danny, I'm Luke. Hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.